today. It's really a privilege to have you with us. Without further ado, let's welcome Coach Colleen.
Thank you all. All right, let me share my screen here so that you can see my slides. Okay, so I'm going to add just a little bit more about my background there. I'll give you a sense of where I am and where I'm coming from in all my comments here today. So first of all, I live just south of Boston, so on the East Coast. I'm married. I have 4 children. My youngest is actually a junior at University of San Diego. I assume some of you are in San Diego, or I know you've been in San Diego. My degree in college was in speech communication, and I launched my first career in the advertising industry. And I was in that business for about 16 years. I worked for several of the multinational ad agencies, and I was in the account management end of the business. So that's the person that's kind of liaison with the client and kind of runs the internal team. So it's sort of a leadership role in that industry. But basically what happened is I got into senior management, and I found that actually the favorite part of my job was helping people who came into my office, usually with one career dilemma or another. I'm not getting along with my creative director. I don't know how to give somebody feedback. And I discovered executive coaching as a potential new career through a psychologist that I'd hired to help me with a project. So ultimately, I decided to cut the corporate cord and hang my shingle and become trained to be a coach and cross my fingers. And that was 20 years ago, and I haven't looked back. So I feel really lucky to have found the career that really fits my strengths. And I didn't even know the strength language then that I know now. My current mix of work is about 70% business coaching with individuals in both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. And I spent about 10% or so of my time doing webinars and team workshops kind of like this, and probably about 20% of my time supporting individuals who want coaching, maybe for things like choosing a new career or launching their career or improving their work-life balance or re-entering the workforce. I mean, you name it. But my biggest and longest term corporate client has been Alphabet, the Google parent company. And that's where I worked with Helen for quite a few years, doing workshops just like this one with her teams. And I've also done workshops quite a bit like this in recent years with companies like Pfizer, and the Boston Red Sox is a big client for me. I do work like this with European startups, academic institutions like UCSD. Really anybody, in my mind, can benefit from learning more about themselves. And I love making every effort I can to strengthen the world in my own little way. And the only other little personal tidbit I'd share before I get you focusing on yourselves is that I've been thinking about positive psychology and strengths-based thinking for a really long time. Kind of goes back to when I was in middle school, like 12 years old. And I used to have this old-fashioned now banana seat bike, and I would jump on my bike constantly in the summer and ride to the little local library in Ohio where I was living. And I always checked out a couple of mystery books, and always, believe it or not, at age 12, a self-help book. So I've been thinking about this kind of stuff for a long time, and I'm really eager to share my expertise with you guys. So here's my agenda for today. I want to share my knowledge and experience with you so that you can leave our session able to fully interpret your strengths profile and go away with ideas of how you could maximize your strengths most effectively in your life, both within your role on Oceanside Perspective, but also related to other roles that you play in your life. Because I know that deepening your self-awareness is going to enable you to be a thought leader and to create ideas that are going to better our world, and to explore the use of technology and to develop your entrepreneurial skills. And what's more, I feel quite sure that the learning you're going to have today is going to be applicable to your volunteer roles with OP, whether you are involved in content strategies, whether you're doing editing, whether you're doing brand artwork, whether you're doing marketing, operations, copywriting. All of those roles can be positively influenced by what you're going to learn today. And also, I guess the last thing I'd say is that I hope that what happens today is that you get to know one another a little bit better through this workshop and through any follow-up activity, which I'm going to suggest at the end that you do with each other with this knowledge after today. So let's start with this kind of basic foundation question. So how can you discover your strengths? If you don't have the benefit of a strength assessment like the one you took, we can rely on other methods to identify our strengths. So on the slide, you see a number of traditional ways to do it. So for example, when you were all children, you were probably much more uninhibited and likely to be using your authentic strengths more readily. No one's watching you, you are yourself. But strengths are also noted for ourselves, or if we're trying to pay attention to other people and figure out their strengths by thinking about, well, when do I have a lot of energy? Or when does that other person seem to feel authentic? Or when are we really at ease? That's an indication you're using your strengths. Or when can you really pay concentrated attention to something? That's indication you or the other person using their strengths. Or what are you learning and picking up really quickly? That's an indication of a strength. Or when to use certain words and phrases like, I love being creative, or it was so much fun to meet new people at that event. Those are all ways to spot strengths in yourself or in other people. Sometimes we think that our colleagues and our friends and our family members can tell us what our strengths are. We ask other people, but I intend to bust that particular belief here shortly as I'm taking you through this. So just keep that in mind. So most of you are probably familiar with another strength-focused assessment on the market, the Clifton, or formerly called the Gallup Strengths Finder. A lot of people do that in school or in corporate work. But my favorite, and of course, our featured strength assessment is the Strengths Profile. This is a dynamic tool. So not only does it measure your strength performance, of course, because you answered questions about whether you perform your strengths well, but it also measures whether you get energy or not from using your strengths and whether you're able to use them or not. And the other assessments don't do that. Plus, given that it's based on 60 strengths, it gives you a lot of granular detail about your strengths. And just an FYI, this assessment comes from a company in the UK called Capfinity. They're online, they're experts on positive psychology, particularly in Europe. And I discovered them when I moved to London with my family a number of years ago. And it's a little story. Alex Lindley, the CEO, at the time, like an 8-person organization, quite a long time ago, I was emailing him and, reading everything he put online and just trying to get him to go out for coffee with me or lunch with me when I first moved to London, because I really wanted to get involved in some way, learn more about how positive psychology is practiced in the UK. He finally agreed to have coffee with me. I'm not sure he knew what to do with my American exuberance, but shortly thereafter, the company introduced the Strengths Profile to the market. And I was actually on the very, very first coach accreditation course with this tool back in 2009. So I've been working with this a long time. And I'm quite sure I'm going to help you improve your personal intelligence today. So before we start looking at your reports, you need to know, right, that a strength has 3 important parts. Obviously, mostly, a strength is something that you perform well. Secondly, as I've mentioned here already, a strength is something that gives you energy. And while that might be helpful to learn what a manager or a colleague or a family member sees as your strengths, only you know which strengths are truly energizing for you. That's really important here. And then lastly, a strength can't be a strength if you're not using it. So therefore, our goal today is to get you thinking about how you can use your most energizing strengths more often. There's risks to not living your life from a strength perspective. You might aim to be well-rounded. We're often taught that as young children and sort of indoctrinated into that way of thinking in our school systems. But it's actually not a wise idea, because the research tells us that we're better off aiming to be exceptional in areas where we are already strong than trying to be strong in areas where we're less capable and truly not energized. Secondly, the studies show us that the feeling of inauthenticity, which happens when we don't use our strengths, is actually a predictor of unhappiness, anxiety, depression. Third thing I'll tell you is that when you're in the workforce, if you're operating regularly in a job that demands more of your weaknesses, which can happen, than your strengths, then your self-confidence is weak. And in reality, your self-confidence is informed by your strength, awareness, and use. As you might imagine, a lot of my executive coaching is about helping people feel more confident in themselves, whether they are brand new in the workforce or whether they are a CEO and telling me I'm comfortable with a board meeting or I'm comfortable with this person or whatever. It all comes down to really knowing what you're good at and using your strengths wisely. So yeah, I guess the last thing I would say here on my slide is that derailment in your life or in your work can happen if we underplay our strengths, right? Or we're going to talk about this if you overplay your strengths. So it's very important to know how to effectively leverage your strengths. And then last thing I'll say is kind of a stage setting way is that the research tells us that many research done by a lot of different organizations tells us that when you use your strengths, especially a few at one time, and when we do anything, we're using few at one time, you feel happy. Think about it. You feel alive. You do something that really energizes you. You feel valued to yourself and other people. You feel authentic, like yourself. And you feel appropriately challenged in areas where you know you can succeed. But if circumstances prevent your strength use, like you're not able, people don't let you step in, they don't let you have a part or a role or whatever, then your resilience can be tested. And now let's admit it, it's stressful to have ideas about how to do something, but no opportunity to do it. So when you step in with your strengths, you reduce your stress, you feel more in control. And studies support that strength use can actually lead to lower levels of depression, higher levels of vitality, and good mental health. And we also know that when you're using your best tools, in other words, your strengths, you are more likely to achieve your goals. One study even showed that when employees regularly use their strengths in their job, they were six times more engaged at work. That's pretty significant and worthy of our attention. And then finally, I mentioned this before, you can grow much faster in your areas of strength simply because you're energized to do that. So I want you to all know your strengths in a granular way. So summary, when you're using the strengths that you're going to be more fully discovering with me today, you can be your best self with strong performance. You can strengthen your relationships outside and inside your work or your volunteer opportunities, which we're going to talk about. And by doing more of what you love, your work output is going to be stronger. And I love this quote on my slide here. It seems to summarize it all. Maya Angelou, the late American poet, said, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. So we're going to start talking now about how you do it. So I want you to do is, if you don't have it up in front of you already, get your strengths profile in front of you, whether you printed it or whether you're looking at it on a screen there. Okay, so the first thing I want you to know is that this company, Capfinity, that created this, did years of research, and they determined that there are 60 common strengths that everybody around the world holds, right? And the assessment you completed is based on those 60 strengths. So if you've got it printed there or whether you're scrolling through it, I first want to kind of walk you through the pages. So page 1, looking at your report, shows you your top strength in each of the 4 different quadrants, which I want to walk you through. If you scroll through for a moment here, page 2 shows your unique quadrant profile, which we're going to have your eye on primarily in this session. Page 3 shows the definitions with all those little dots. It shows all 60 of your strengths, categorized by the key you see at the top there. So starting left to right on your page 3, whatever you see in dark green are all of your realized strengths. Whatever you see in light green are all of your unrealized strengths. And again, I'll come back and explain these. What you see in yellow there, whatever quantity you have, are your learned behaviors. And then whatever you see in the far right bottom corner are your self-acclaimed weaknesses. And every one of you has a different number of strengths in each of these 4 different categories, depending on how you answered the assessment. So in a few minutes, we're going to go through all this in detail. And then if you continue looking at your pages, starting on page 4, you find the definitions of all your realized strengths, and that might continue to page 5, kind of depending how many you have. And then once you pass through your realized strengths, if you keep scrolling or keep turning your pages there, you'll see the definitions of your unrealized strengths. Then you keep going, you'll see definitions of your learned behaviors. And then finally, the last set of definitions for whichever strengths you indicated that you're low in performance and low in energy, that's in your weaknesses. So I'm going to have you stop scrolling there and go back to page 2. We'll come back to those other pages at the end in a little bit, but I want to start focusing on what we already looked at there. So you put your eye back on page 2 of your report. That is your unique quadrant profile. And on that page, you're going to see up to 7 realized strengths, up to 7 unrealized strengths, up to 4 learned behaviors, and up to 3 weaknesses. And know that within each of your 4 quadrants, what's presented there is in priority order based on how you responded to the assessment. Some of you might have less than 7, 4, and 3 in any of the boxes. No, there's no magic formula. Your strength distribution reflects how you are feeling now about your ability to perform your strengths, whether you're getting energy from using them or not, and whether you're able to use them very frequently or not. And this profile report was created by Capfinity to very purposefully show you more strengths in those realized and unrealized strength green boxes on the top than you find in the learned behavior and weakness boxes on the bottom. And that's because your goal and our focus is to find ways to maximize your strengths rather than put heavy emphasis, as I said, on fixing your weaknesses. Because by default, we spend commonly a lot of our energy trying to improve in our areas of weakness rather than get stronger in our areas of strength. And if that's you, I want to hopefully shift your focus today. And I'm not saying that you should ignore your weaknesses, but on the contrary, I'm going to explain how you can use your strengths to compensate for your weaknesses. And then lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are 60 strengths in this profile report. So you actually have more strengths in some or all of these 4 quadrants than what this page is showing, because this is just showing you the top of the list. We're going to focus primarily on this page, though, because there's plenty for us to kind of carve out and look at here at the top of the list. All right, so we're going to start with the realized strengths. So taking a look in the upper left, these are the strengths, whatever it shows there, that you perform well, are energized by, and are using most often right now. There are many ways your common sense. They are, I would say, your superpowers. Sometimes we even take our realized strengths for granted because they're the lens through which you very authentically see the world. People probably know you and see you for these strengths. They are often, I would also say, kind of elements, if you were to define your personal brand or your leadership brand, some of you have done that already before. These are the strengths that most highly probably define your brand. Hopefully, all of you have had a chance to look through your profile report before our call, but I want to pause here just for half a minute or so, give you a chance to skim the definitions of just your top 7 or fewer realized strengths, starting on page 4. So scroll to page 4 where the definitions are, and just read through the definitions of your top 7 realized strengths. And I'm going to play a little background music thematically here to get you thinking about this. Do you hear that music, by the way? No? Ah, I don't know if I have it set up properly. Well, I was trying to play the theme music from Rocky. But anyway, I probably have to go back and figure out my settings. Sorry about that. Okay. So I'll get your attention. So I think I have what's an interesting little strength tidbit to share with you. So very commonly, we use several of our strengths together in any given activity and kind of stack them up on top of each other, like this little slide picture shows. So for example, if I'm in an executive coaching session with a brand new client, I'm going to use my rapport builder strength by sharing some personal anecdotes, asking questions that will help me quickly find ways to build a relationship with that client. And then secondly, I'm using my listener strength. I'm paying really close attention to what the person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally. And then for me, a third one of my strengths is time optimizer. So I'm trying to use our time really productively, addressing thoroughly and efficiently what the person wants to get out of our session. And then for me, fourth strength I would be using typically in a coaching session is a team builder. So I'm trying to provide encouragement to that person, helping them feel confident in their next steps. So the research tells us that when we, you and I, when we use 4 or more, whatever ones of our strengths in combination, we can get into that state of psychological flow where we lose track of time. So that coaching session example I just provided might not resonate with you guys because you're not a coach. But if you have rapport builder and listener and time optimizer and esteem builder are your realized strengths, you're likely to be energized by that coaching experience like I am and surprised that, wow, the time went so quickly. It always happens to me. Coaching sessions feel like last like that. You all have your own powerful strength combinations. So if I had the privilege of sitting with each one of you one-on-one, and I were to ask you to tell me about a time when something you did was well accomplished and fun, chances are it would be a situation in which you used a number of your realized and maybe your unrealized strengths at one time. So the point I want to make is this. If or when you're stuck trying to get something done, get it launched, get it off the ground, overcome some kind of obstacle, choose one of your realized strengths, anyone, and think about, well, how could you use that realized strength in service of whatever the thing is you're trying to do? And then go back to your list and choose another one of your realized strengths, and then another one, and then another one. And I can just about guarantee you that the formerly daunting task will suddenly feel doable and probably even exciting because you're seeing it unfold through the lens of your energizing strengths. For one of my clients I mentioned before is the Boston Red Sox, the baseball team, and I work not with the players, but with the front office staff. And one of the leaders in particular I work with, her group has done the strengths profile assessment every year. I think it's our 6th year in a row. So therefore, the team members, they all know each other's and their own strengths pretty well. And in this case, typically, when one of her direct reports approaches her and is stuck or frustrated about how to solve a problem, she pulls out their strengths profile report and she takes them through the same exercise of choose one strength. Like, what could you do? What strength could you use to fix this? And then another one, and then another one using their own authentic strengths. We tend to give people advice from our own strengths. But I do this all the time in coaching sessions because clients can see their own resourcefulness if they start thinking about, well, how could they use their strengths? So remember this, you are special, each one of you, because of your unique combination of strengths and how you put them into great use. And in my experience, the best way to maximize your career potential is to find roles that demand the unique strength combination that you have. And I urge you to really think about what are your powerful complementary strengths and how are you or can you be using them? All right, look at this cartoon. So you've undoubtedly heard the label inner critic. Sometimes it's commonly referred to as imposter syndrome. So I love this cartoon in which we see a patient in a hospital bed. His doctor is speaking to him and says, "Congratulations, Mr. Meglin. We have successfully removed your inner critic." Wouldn't that be nice? But the reason I chose to show this cartoon is because I believe that your strengths are your wisdom and your source and reason for your self-confidence. And in my experience, you can reduce that inner critic chatter in your head when you know your strengths well and trust that you have used them wisely. And in that way, you're developing your inner mentor. And it's your inner mentor who can quiet your inner critic. All right. I want you to think about your strengths, as I said before, as superpowers. And I'd love to hear from a few of you, like few of you, one at a time, come off of mute and tell me, what's your favorite strength that might very well be one of your superpowers? Anybody?
I would start perhaps with explainer. I really liked it when I saw that the first time. But then I went through my mind and recalled at what situation that might happen. And then, for example, I had in the field of sport, I wanted to use a new friend of mine there, and he asked another friend of mine to explain it to him, and he was, no, go to Valentin, he will explain it way better. And then now I'm like, okay, but that's good. And then especially in my university environment, it helps a lot to get my ideas across the table to bring everyone on the same page. And I really liked it, seeing that in the top 3 of mine.
Awesome. Excellent. All right, somebody else. What's a realized strength that you're excited to see there on your list?
There's a couple that I'm excited about that I liked. One was Catalyst and the other was Adventure. And I like them just because I felt like they definitely kind of represented how I feel like I go about life, and just, what it is that I kind of like to do, just, with friends, with colleagues, really any work or even social environment.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, somebody else.
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead.
no. Yeah, okay. Thanks. There's 2 that I really like. One is a resolver, and also the second one being emotional awareness. And I think they're really applicable to my former career as a medical doctor, now as a management consultant. Is having to be really empathetic in everything I do, and just being aware of people's emotions. Yeah, these 2 are the ones that.
And helping them solve the problem, right? Aware.
Exactly.
Yeah. Powerful combination. Yeah, very powerful combination. Awesome. L.I.T., did you want to share?
Yeah, I think 2 that I really felt good about that was on my realized strength was humor and esteem builder.
Yeah.
I know that I always liked working in groups, and I felt like having a good optimistic environment was always really helpful. And just seeing how these 2 would probably go together really well to build a really good environment it's good to hear that it's one of my strengths.
Humor is so good because it helps people relax, right, in your presence, hopefully, and just lighten the mood when sometimes it's necessary. Yeah. Anybody else want to share realized strengths that they particularly enjoy using?
I had organizer and planner, which kind of go hand in hand. And I guess it was always just something that I enjoyed doing, but now I see that's something I can maybe apply to like a professional role.
Excellent. And one of the reasons that I love this report is that the definitions are pretty rich. All those middle pages that offer 3 different levels or 3 different ways to explain that strength, and it's such great language that you can use in your LinkedIn profile, resume, interview responses, bio you have to write, introducing yourself to other people. Yeah. Anybody else want to share? Lynn.
I think quite useful in my daily life, as in I always see the good side of things, and I can flip page pretty easily, and I could try to find excuses for myself to do things. And professionally, as an architect, you know, when project getting dragged out or, you know, get canceled, you just never get beaten up. Just pick up next day and carry on.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thanks, Lynn. Okay, I'll keep moving here. I'm going to give you more chances to speak up. All right, so before we move on from the realized strengths, there's one important concept I want you to grasp, and that is, you probably noticed when you read the definitions of your realized strengths a little bit ago, you saw that used wisely suggestion with each of your strengths. And that's because using our realized strengths is a balancing act. Like sometimes our strengths can have diminishing returns if we're not thoughtful and wise about how and when we use them. And in my experience, our greatest weaknesses are not typically what appear in red in the bottom right quadrant of your profile, but we can become weak if we overplay our realized strengths. And that can get us into trouble, either because we have blind spots and can't see that our overdependence on one strength is limiting the use of all of our other strengths, which can happen very commonly, or we can inadvertently create interpersonal conflict that's rooted in the perhaps misuse or overuse of a realized strength, most likely in the mind of the other person, however unintentional on your part. So for example, let's say counterpoint is a realized strength of yours, and you love as such to bring an alternative perspective to situations. Like you want to present options, decisions being made, make sure they're thinking about all the options. But can you imagine your colleagues might read your use of your counterpoint strength as you being constantly defensive, argumentative, never satisfied. You always got these ideas. Like here you're thinking you're being helpful. Can you imagine how the counterpoint could be a blind spot for you, but also the source of conflict with your direct report or your colleague or whoever it might be? But it's hard not to overplay our realized strengths, because that strength, as we've been discussing, is authentic to you and it feels really right. It feels really energizing to use that strength. And you feel a little vulnerable if you don't use it as much as you think it might be needed. But I want you to think about this, and that is you can be a little less dependent on a realized strength that might be overplayed if you take your foot off the gas with that realized strength and simultaneously press the gas pedal down on another one of your realized or unrealized strengths. And that's because you get energy from a wide variety of your strengths. And you can be less reliant on one when you continue to feel energized and authentic from another one of your strengths. So hopefully after today, you'll be a little more aware of each of your top strengths anyway, and better able to use them wisely, knowing that all of them can serve you well if used strategically and intentionally. So let's go around a little bit more again here. Looking at, again, at your realized strengths, like which one or ones might you overplay? Anybody?
Well, so my number one strength is competitive, and I know that I can easily overlook it because I find myself finding things taking some things maybe a little bit too competitive when other people may not share that same passion for something. And so like even little games, I might try and like always win, but it might not always be necessarily like the best thing for the situation.
Mm-hmm. My husband's lead strength is competitive, and he's always saying, I beat you, or I won, or whatever. I'm like, oh, competitive is one of my weaknesses, so I don't even care. But sometimes, you know, I mean, cause a little bit of a rub there, and I can understand. That's my lead strength is time optimizer, so I'm always trying to squeeze lots of things in, and I know that drives him crazy too, because his action is one of his strengths. So he's sitting in the garage in the car 5 minutes before we're supposed to leave to go somewhere, right? To get ready to go. And I'm like, I got 5 more minutes. I can empty the dishwasher and answer a few more emails and pack my bag or whatever. And so, the conflict happens. So it's like logical to me to be this way, logical to you to be competitive, but that can happen. All right, somebody else. What's a realized strength that maybe from time to time you might overplay?
One of mine is incubator, which it says is liking to think or ponder a lot. And I think the overthinking can kind of take over things for me sometimes. And sometimes I just need to like act and get to the point of like doing something productive rather than just thinking.
But again, it's hard, right? Because you naturally get energy from thinking and it feels logical to think and you feel stronger and more in control when you have time to think. And it's really hard to know, like, when are we sort of going over starting to have diminishing returns. But that's when I said before, remember, you can lift your foot off the incubator a little bit if you look at your other strengths and say, all right, what could I be doing? How could I be showing up in this situation instead? That's also part of my authentic being. That's going to enable me to feel okay, to incubate a little bit less because I'm going to be creative or whatever else might be one of your realized or unrealized strengths, Annika. All right, somebody else. What's an unrealized strength that maybe to other people or to yourself you occasionally overplay?
Perhaps
I'm sorry, I might have
for
misheard.
me, my second. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I was actually just going to ask a question to clarify, but you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. For me, my second strength is humor, and I do know I get the feedback that sometimes the humor is not like I don't use it at the right time when something is really critical, and then I should like take myself back and don't make jokes, just lighten the mood, but more support the person, or like more get a bigger focus on things that need to be done.
I hear that a lot from people who have humor as a lead strength. All right, what's your question?
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't mishear. We're still talking about the realized strengths, right?
Yes.
Not
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So on that note, I think, one thing that shows up as a realized strength for me is adaptable, which is something that I like, but if I was to describe how it might be, overused at times, I think I can actually express that by looking to like some of the weaknesses that show up in my chart. For instance, like unconditionality or and adherence and stuff like that, where sometimes I can almost allow a situation to become too fluid in my mind and how I'm approaching it, and sometimes start to lose a little bit of touch with maybe what the initial intention was or what the original purpose was, and just like I said, constantly being fluid and being willing to change things.
As I've mentioned already in this introduction here, I spent a lot of time with leaders, and all the strengths that you're mentioning come into conversations, but I'm just thinking about, we just said about adaptability and how sometimes a leader who has adaptability as a strength can find it so easy to adapt and then not remember how hard it is for everybody else to adapt if it's not one of their energizing or lead strengths. And then you have disgruntled people, or morale is low or whatever, because those people just aren't as flexible as you might be. So it's good that you're paying attention and thinking about that particular overplayed strength, or any of them for that matter. Anybody else, a strength that you might overplay?
I have one. So one of the strengths that I feel I tend to overplay is pride, which is like setting a very high standard for myself when delivering any work I do. But also that means that I do get frustrated when those standards are not met, or those that I work with don't share the similar kind of standard as well. Definitely something that I'm kind of trying to juggle now in my new career. Yeah, that's definitely one that I'm overplaying time to time.
Again, it's hard, right? It's hard not to overplay it, because why wouldn't you want to work to a high standard? Why would the other person not want to work to a high standard? But here's a little tip for you, and this applies for a lot of your situations. That might be, Tim, where you say to someone else with whom you're working, which strength could you use or which of your strengths could you use, whether they have a report or not, to help you deliver to a really higher standard. I noticed that you're very organized, or I noticed that you are very creative, or I noticed that you're really good at building relationships. Like, how could that help your work quality be that much harder? Because their method of getting there might be a little different than your method of getting there because of whatever their strengths might be. All right, anybody else realize strength that might get overplayed? All right, I'm gonna keep moving here. All right, so let's look back on page 2, but let's turn our attention now to the unrealized strengths. So the upper right quadrant. So the definition of an unrealized strength is when you perform well and find energizing like the realized strengths, but one that you're not using as frequently right now. You rated it lower in use. That might be because you're not thinking about it. It might be because of the current projects you have at hand. It might be the fact that you're managing children, or you have direct reports, or other people, who are doing that activity for you that demanded that unrealized strength. There could be a lot of different reasons why you're not using it. So I'm going to pause again for about a half a minute, give you a chance to read your top 7 or fewer, if you have fewer, unrealized strengths, and think about what they mean, and then I'll come back and give you some more comments. Okay. So if you have some attractive unrealized strengths on your list, I would urge you to try to find new projects in which you can use these gifts of yours more often. Or if an opportunity just doesn't present itself on this volunteer team that you're part of, or in your classwork, or in your jobs, then I'd suggest you try to find ways to use your unrealized strength gifts in your personal life. So I'm going to give you an example of that. So persistence is one of my unrealized strengths. And given my line of work, I don't really need to use persistence that often. So here's my story. So I think we all know that exercise is important for our physical and our mental health. But I also know that once I open my laptop in the morning, I can get easily swallowed into my work and find many reasons why there's no time to exercise on, a given day like today. So instead, I've been using my unrealized strength of persistence nearly every day to keep myself in an exercise routine before I open my laptop. So this morning, while I was midway through a 30-minute little run on the recumbent bike, the thought of quitting was shooting through my brain as fast as the burn was shooting through my muscles. And I knew, however, that I wanted to tell you the story today. So I absolutely needed to use my persistence to keep myself going when the sweat was dripping and my laptop was calling me. But I truly felt energized, especially when I got to the end, because of my persistence, unrealized strength, and because now I'm able to say I did my exercise routine and tell you the story. So I want you, right, to look at your list there. Think about ways your unrealized strengths could open new experiences for you on this OP team, in your schoolwork, if you're in school, in your work, if you're in the job force, in your personal life. The next page on your profile after the unrealized strength definition, so page numbers are different for everybody, but is a page that says your potential at the top. So it says unrealized strength, your potential. it gives you advice on how you can get your unrealized strengths into action. So this is kind of generic advice, but nonetheless, hopefully applicable to each of the unrealized strengths that you have, the top 7. So it would give you ideas of how to set goals that excite you and develop the potential inside of you. It'll give you some ideas of how you can get more energy into your life. It'll give you some ideas for some of your unrealized strengths, how you can collaborate with other people together, maybe share your unrealized strengths with your manager or your future employer, and really give you ideas of how you can make a difference in the future. So here's another chance for some of you to come off mute. Maybe some of you haven't shared so far. Like, what's an unrealized strength or 2 or 3, whatever, that you wish you could use more, maybe in your role on this particular team as part of the Oceanside Perspective volunteer group, or outside of this, but what looks kind of juicy and appealing on your unrealized strength list? Anybody?
For me, one of them was self-awareness. I like the use more part of it, where it says to maybe dedicate like 10 minutes each day to write a journal, because I feel like my days are so like hectic, and one of my realized strengths are like time optimization and being competitive. So I feel like my days are always like so busy, I don't really have a lot of time to dedicate to myself and have like introspection and stuff like that. So I thought that was an interesting one, and one that I could apply more.
So Edward, so if you have time optimizer and competitive, I'm guessing that you're so busy, partly because you make yourself busy because you like to be productive and to get a lot done, accomplish a lot. And if you're paying attention to other people and how they're doing, that might motivate you even more to be busy and accomplish a lot. So which of your other realized or unrealized strengths might enable you to achieve the goal that you just were describing?
Are you talking about like other traits or like within these?
Yeah, within those, because in any given activity, right, where you use multiple of our strengths, we're relating to people in some way, we're thinking in some way, we're motivating ourselves in some way. So I'm wondering, with any goal, but just thinking about what you just said there, what other strengths could be helpful to you?
I use, or one of them that came up is self-belief. I feel like for me, just being able to be confident in what I can do helps me a lot to just stay focused on and keep my options open too. So
And the more you know your strengths, the more your self-belief will be grounded in what those strengths are, and therefore you'll be more self-aware and able to use them more effectively to be the kind of efficiency you want to be and the kind of competitor you want to be. All right, I'll let you off the hook. Somebody else, what's an unrealized strength that you think you might want to use a little bit more?
I got enabler and catalyst and strategic awareness and organizer. And I was involved in a group project where I have to kind of be like the organizer of the group and giving everyone tasks to do so we can get together for working towards a group presentation thing. Yeah, initially I don't feel comfortable giving people being bossing around people, but I feel like sometimes I have to give them tasks so everyone can work efficiently, and I like things to be organized in a way. Yeah.
And did you say enabler? Was that your second one?
Yeah.
Or enabler. All right. So what you're describing to me there seems like it's a great combination of enabler and catalyst and organizer. So you're organizing people, what they need to do, right? But if you give them tasks that are going to stretch them and help them grow and learn, then that way you're enabling them on top of it to be an even better version of themselves. And if you're doing it with a whole group of people at one time, you're catalyzing like them to get energy from one another by the way that you organize them, and you're helping them feel, each of them, you know, competent in an invaluable contributor to the, you know, whole group as a catalyst group moving forward together. So I just mentioned that you think about that really powerful combination you have of those three together. Sometimes we look at an activity through one of our strengths, but if you read the definitions or you get somebody like me pushing you along, then you realize, I can see now I'm going to get energy not only from one of them, but multiple of these strengths to make this thing happen.
Yeah, thanks.
Very good. All right, somebody else. What's an unrealized strength that you might want to use more on this team or in any other aspect of your life?
So my top unrealized strength is centered, and the second one is action. I think both of those are things that I'd like to use more. My
Okay. You lost yourself.
my yeah, so centered, what I've noticed about myself is like actually my top realized strength is also competitive. And I just really enjoy and appreciate being able to be in very high pressure and very competitive environments. And also just to kind of, you know, be able to take on that pressure and that kind of weight and be able to deal with it and, you know, be able to work with people inside those types of situations. And kind of going into the second one, action, you know, also being able to, you know, be active and actually be able to do something in you know, a high pressure situation as opposed to just like kind of watching it go by. And I feel like part of the reason that I haven't been able to really, you know, do those things lately is because so I've been working for the past few years and almost all of that work has been remote. So I haven't been able to really like feel like I'm working with people as much as I'd like to and really be as, you know, feel like I'm as present as I'd like to. And one thing that, you know, just kind of my ears picked up on was when you were talking about your experience in marketing and advertising, how, you know, one of your first introductions to the industry was working like on managing accounts and, you know, kind of organizing that work and running those internal teams. And that's actually identical to the work that I've been doing for the past few years as well. So there's aspects to it I really like being able to work with, you know, people to some degree, being able to be creative, you know, think preventatively and strategically, but it's just that sense of like, you know, having like no, you know, sense of detachment from the people I'm working with. But then on top of that, like, you know, I'm engaging a designer to create something for the client, or I'm working with the client to create something for them, or, you know, I'm facilitating things, but it just feels like I'm a little bit detached from like the hands-on work, which is something that I miss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds like you're self-aware, which is good. And what you're saying is causing me to want to remind you and all of you that in my experience, some of the best jobs that any of us, one of the best jobs or the best, maybe I should go so far as to say that any of you could get, is the one that demands the intersection of some of your greatest strengths, where that job wouldn't be able to be performed well if it weren't for someone that had A, B, C, D, whatever, E, F, G, whatever, whichever your strengths that are so critical to success of that job, that it fits you so easily and it comes easily. Like the job isn't even hard. Not everybody could do it, but only you could do it because you have the competitive strength and the action strength or whatever, you know, whatever is called for in a particular situation. Really pay attention to that, because then, like I said, work won't feel like work. And when you have opportunities to volunteer, like in this organization, you can find ways to volunteer that really tap into your realized and maybe your unrealized strengths, then it'll be extra enjoyable for you to play the role that you're playing. Anybody else unrealized strength that you would like to use more?
Coach, this is Melanie. I actually participated to your workshop last year, and it was very enlightening. I learned to discover myself. And one of the unrealized strengths I found is the planner. And I try to use a little bit more, especially with I'm doing with Oceanside Perspective. And this really compensates one of my weakness, which is your strength, the time optimizer. So that was very, very helpful. However, one of the other unrealized strengths that I have is emotional awareness. I also like to use more. However, I realized if I use more emotional awareness, that sort of paralyzes a little bit the planner side, because I think too much for the other party, for example. So is that anything I can improve utilizing both?
I can imagine that scenario where you don't want to upset them. What else sits on your realized and unrealized strength list that might be valuable in those situations when you're trying to create a plan for other people to follow and you're a little sensitive to everybody's feelings?
Yeah, there's the action and the prevention. And then the realized strengths, I think I can use a bit more. There's a persistence and relation deepener.
Okay. Let's take the prevention. So the prevention strength for everybody who may not have it on your top of your list means that you think ahead to what could go wrong, and then you figure out some sort of a plan to prevent that from happening. So Melanie was good at thinking ahead to what could go wrong and coming up with a plan and energized by that. So I'm wondering, Melanie, how could you use your prevention strength to be sure or to try and manage your overplaying of the emotional awareness when you need to get plans underway?
Yeah, that is a good combination. I should try out in my future. Penny.
Like thinking ahead, like, so who am I going to be extra sensitive to? And for how long, should I give them an extra hour to get this finished? Because that's probably enough everybody needs. And know that if I give them more than that, then it's going to cause a problem for this other person. So using that prevention to manage the emotional awareness and the planner effectively. Because again, here, another way of illustrating the point that we use multiple of our strengths in any given activity. It's just a matter of having your self-awareness become deeper through things like this, and then being thoughtful about how you go about it. Because if you're not thoughtful about it, all of you, then it just kind of happens by default, and you don't develop to be the strongest person that you can be with your own authentic self.
Yeah, that's also, I think, the best way to utilize this strength profile is really to regularly go back and check the other unrealized strengths and try to practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Melanie. Okay, anybody else want to share an unrealized strength that you might want to use more?
Yes. So for me personally, it's emotional awareness, and I want to add emotional intelligence. So why? It's so important in every situation, not only if we are talking about a business situation, also if we are talking about a personal relationship with others. It's so important to perceive, use, understand, manage, and handle my own emotions. And also the most important aspect probably is to understand the emotions of others. So not only manage your own emotions, also manage or understand the emotions of others. And I definitely have to and want to improve my emotional awareness and emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. It's difficult to learn and to improve, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the fact that it's an unrealized strength for you, meaning that it gives you energy, is positive, because it would suggest that the more energy you spend, more time you spend trying to use that strength, the more fulfilling it's going to be. And then you're going to want to use it more. So it becomes almost a self-fulfilling kind of thing. Very good. All right, let me keep moving here as I get through the rest of this. So before we move on from these realized and unrealized strengths, I want to offer you a couple strength strategies. So given the ups and downs of life, it's important to know how each of us can stay resilient. And you all have the capacity for resilience, even on the hardest of days, but you all have your own unique formula for resilience based on your own strengths. So when you need to stay strong, I urge you to find ways to use the realized and unrealized strengths that give you the greatest energy and feeling of authenticity. So, for example, if you're an organizer, as some of you have said, you've had a hard day, go home and organize your garage, organize your kitchen cabinet, or if creativity is your strength, like get that in play, because the more you go to whatever gives you control and energy, the more you're going to fill yourself back up and feel more on top of whatever it was that kind of set you back and challenged your resilience. The other thing I want to say is that I'm sure over the years you've read lots of articles or blog posts or whatever telling us that reminding ourselves of what we're grateful for is one of the most powerful ways we can boost our psychological immune system. But I want to point out that we tend to offer our appreciation to other people in recognition of what matters to us in line with our own strengths. So, for example, if my colleague Kim does an amazing job completing a lot of tasks in one afternoon, I might, or I do, really enthusiastically express my gratitude for that feat because I have time optimizer as a strength and I love squeezing as much as possible into every day. But Kim might feel totally drained by all these tasks that I give her. So my compliment doesn't touch her heart in the way that I had intended. But if I compliment her amazing management of the details, which is consistent with her detail strength, suddenly she feels really happy because using that detail strength is energizing for her. Didn't even occur to me because I don't love details, but my expression of gratitude gives her a psychological boost while giving her also a meaningful nod. So I mentioned in the very beginning of this workshop, all those strength spotting tips, like paying attention to the way people say something, pay attention to how quickly you learn something. So remember, when you pay attention to when someone else is energized or learning quickly or whatever it might be, you can get clear on their strengths, and then you can offer gratitude that makes an impact and it helps them feel strong and resilient, especially when they might need some support. So just a couple little tips there. All right, let's go look at learned behaviors. So back on page 2, these are lower left. So learned behaviors are not true strengths because they're not energizing. You can think about learned behaviors as an area of strength that's draining because you rated it low in energy, high in performance, but lower in energy. So for example, Spotlight is draining for me. It's a learned behavior. So despite all the years that I've been doing workshops like this one, I still worry, like, am I keeping this interesting enough for you? Or am I on time? So I can hopefully perform well in the Spotlight here. And maybe you think of it as my strength, but for me, it's draining. And it doesn't make me feel as strong as when I'm using my realized strengths or unrealized strengths. So I'm gonna leave that with you. I'll come back to that story in a minute. Let me just pause here, give again another half a minute or so. Read the definitions of your top 4 learned behaviors, which will follow the pages of all of your unrealized strength definitions. Okay. So I'm going to guess that some of you are nodding yes as you read the definitions of your learned behaviors. Know that the intensity of the drain or the burnout from your learned behavior can be different depending on the context in which you're using that learned behavior. So for example, you might say, well, my rapport builder learned behavior is not draining with this team or my acquaintances, but it's definitely draining when I have to network at a professional event. So as you look at your learned behaviors, think about how, where, and with whom you're using these. And if a strength shows up here as a learned behavior, there must be at least one significant type of situation when using that strength is draining for you. So, like, what do we do about the burnout, given that we all have draining strengths? So your goal with learned behaviors is to moderate them, either by finding help from someone else who genuinely gets energized by that draining strength of yours, because remember, you could be doing them a favor and giving yourself a favor in turn if they help you with it or do it for you. Or you could moderate the learned behavior by using one or more of your realized or unrealized strengths to help you in that given draining learned behavior situation. So for example, go back to that spotlight story I just told you about myself. So I have realized strengths and unrealized strengths that include esteem builder, enabler, service, creativity, optimism. So when I use all of those strengths in preparing for presentation like this, or if I use those strengths before we even get on this call to remind myself of how great it is that I get to help all of you improve your self-esteem, feel more enabled, feel more optimistic, have creative ideas, then suddenly I forget I'm in the spotlight because I'm way in the zone providing this service to all of you. So my learned behavior is much less draining because I'm using all of these energizing strengths of mine with it. So all of you, as I've mentioned before, you all have your own strength combinations that you can similarly employ to strategize in a draining scenario. So if you find yourself in a situation where you need to use a draining learned behavior, take a look at your list of realized and unrealized strengths and figure out which ones, hopefully at least 4 of them, that you can use with that draining learned behavior to kind of take the edge off and to reframe the situation as one in which you'll be energized by all of the other strengths that you're using alongside when necessary, that learned behavior. Okay. So last time, love to have a few of you share, like, what is on your learned behavior list that you're good at, but may not be your favorite strength to be using right now.
I would
Tim.
say,
Tim, why don't you go and then Ellie?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so one on my list is, which isn't very surprising, is detail. So I put a lot of focus on detail in my work, and it can at times get very, very draining. And it's interesting when you say that you should apply your kind of unrealized strengths to kind of combat this. And I think for me, it would be more creativity, but also with my other strength, which is, time optimizer and strategic awareness. So really just focus on the high level details rather than things that won't have a lot of impact on the outcome of a work. Yeah, that is.
Or maybe as a time optimizer, you set a timetable and say, all right, I'm just going to spend 10 minutes going through all these details. And I'm gonna squeeze as much as possible into these 10 minutes to go through all this. So it's the time that makes you want to do the details more than the finding the mistakes. Details, by the way, details and work ethic are the #1 and #2 most common learned behaviors. So probably several of you have detail and or work ethic on your report and know that you have a lot of company around the world with those. All right, Elliot, what did you want to say?
I was gonna say how incubator was one of my top 3 learned behaviors. I noticed that I do reading this and then thinking about instances where I do get really tired. I tend to overthink things. And I realized that, I mean, it's a little, what should I say? It's like relieving to hear, like, okay, if I just stop overthinking and really trust myself, use one of my strengths, which is optimism, and just trust that something good is gonna come out of whatever happens. I can kind of like not use the incubator trait as much.
Brilliant. Yep. Great example. All right. One more person. Learner behavior that's good habit training. Anybody?
Actually, I want to share as well as a question.
Okay.
So you brought up detail earlier, and that's my number one learned behavior. And it's incredibly draining, but it's also something that I feel like I've been spending so much time working on and implementing and trying to get better just because it's necessary, that it started to take away from it's almost like it started to create weaknesses in some way, kind of like diminish the self-belief and those other things. So is that possible? Is that something to watch for? And what can one do with that?
I definitely think it's possible because of the draining piece of it. And without looking at the rest of your strengths profile, and I'm happy to have a chat with you afterward about this. I think the best thing you can do about it is to pile on as many of your other strengths as possible. So you sort of smother the drain of it and you get your self-belief from doing well enough with a detail and doing well with your other strengths. Because it's, if you think about it, unless we're a narcissist and fooling ourselves, we can't be good at and energized by all 60 strengths. So the more aware you are of the ones that do make you feel strong and energized and capable and effective, the more able you are to kind of let go of what you are not totally let go and not do it, but let go of the expectation of yourself that you need to be good at everything or better than other people at everything, because you own the ones that you own. And it's okay for other people to own their strengths too. And then we figure out, how we need to work together to complete the picture of what the team needs to deliver on the, objectives that you have at hand.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, let me get to my finish up here. So weaknesses, back on page 2 are the definitions of your weaknesses. So quite simply, weakness is something that you said you don't perform well, and you also find it de-energizing. So let me be quiet here again for the last time for half a minute and give you a chance to read the definitions of your top 3 weaknesses there. Okay. All right, so the goal with our weaknesses is, as I said before, not to put extra effort in this area because it's de-energizing to be focused on our weaknesses and hard to have significant growth there relative to the same investment of your time and you realize your unrealized strengths. So the key action steps around your weaknesses are similar to learned behaviors. That is, you want to try to minimize the risk of exposure or the wobble of your weakness by either 1, finding someone else who can partner with you or take the responsibility for you in that area of weakness because it's energizing for them. So example might be narrator is your weakness and you're not good at storytelling. You might use your rapport builder strength to get ideas or stories for your presentation from someone else who's really good at spinning stories. Or a second way to work more effectively with or around your weakness is to use one of your realized or unrealized strengths to compensate for. So for example, I mentioned before, competition's a weakness for me. My family loves to play games, especially if we're on vacation, everybody's all together. Unfortunately for them, good for me, I couldn't care less if I win, but like, how do I motivate myself to participate rather than miss that bonding experience? So I tell myself, well, it's not really a competition for me. Like instead, it's an energizing relationship deepener opportunity for me, one of my strengths, with my husband and my kids who love to win and showcase their success, like posted up on the refrigerator. So I gameplay to get the joy of using my relationship deepener strength. And like with the learned behaviors, I'm reframing my weakness as an opportunity to use one of my strengths. So think about how that type of strategy already is or could enable you to stand strong and not wobble despite that annoying weakness because of the power of other people or the power of others of your strengths. I'm not going to go around this time. All right, I want to point out the last few pages in your report. So if you go back and scroll back through where we left off before, one of the pages after all the definitions says introducing the strength of families. It's somewhere around page 15, 16, 17. Everybody's pages are a little bit different based on your strengths. So we get there. On this page, you see that all 60 strengths have been conceptually organized into 5 different families. So this is everybody's page. This page is the same. It's kind of like a definition page. So all of your strengths are either being, as you can see there, communicating, motivating, relating, or thinking. And I often help my clients define their personal brand, like I said before, for their LinkedIn profile or a bio or a resume or whatever, by drafting a paragraph about themselves in each of these 5 different dimensions of their brand by using the definitions of your key realized and unrealized strengths in each family. I'm going to show you another page to look at for that in a moment here. The next page, if you scroll to the next one, shows you the proportion of strength type within each family for you. So here you just might want to note if you get more energy as depicted in the green from one family versus another. This page, the next one, if you scroll the next one, called your strengths family distribution, is my favorite page of the entire report, because as you can see, it takes all of your strengths in each strength family and shows you which ones are realized, which ones are unrealized, learned behaviors, and weakness. And that personal brand statement I mentioned a moment ago would be fueled by the words or the strengths in your realized and unrealized strengths columns here. And then commonly I refer to this page if I'm trying to figure out how to best approach a task. So for example, looking at your thinking strengths here might help you think about, well, how can you get started? Are you a planner? Do you need to figure out how to be creative? Or looking at your motivating strengths, you might ask yourself, well, what approach do I need to make this thing I have to do more motivating? Or if drive is one of my strengths, and how can I set some goals? So this is kind of a strategy summary on this page here. The next one's a career guide. It shows you 6 recommended careers for your realized strengths in alphabetical order, and 2 for your unrealized strengths based on the data crunching that Capfinity did to show you what are the sectors, the career sectors that are commonly matched with people who have similar realized strengths to you and have similar unrealized strengths to you. And they data crunch like 60,000 profiles, 85 different countries. So this might be interesting for you. And then the next page at the top says what's next, and that highlights some of the additional resources you can access from the vendor. So if you want to learn more about how to use your strengths, how to maximize them, I'd encourage you to check out the resources on this page of their website. And then the last 2 pages of your report are the dictionary, and it's got abbreviated definitions of all 60 strengths, as you see there. I often recommend to my clients to use this page for spotting strengths in other people. So for example, if you have to present your idea to Helen, something you guys want to do on this team, beforehand, maybe you look through the dictionary and you choose the 10 probable realized strengths for her based on the way you see her seem energized and how she feels authentic, what you observe as your strength spotting her, and then build your recommendation and presentation with the mindset of Helen's strengths in mind, because through that through what strength lens might she be evaluating your idea? So that's how I find these 2 pages to be helpful. And then also think back to the strength families, like how is she motivated? How does she relate? What's her thinking style? And then you can be more strategic in how you interact with her. And then because all of you in some way or another are leading and managing other people, your family members, your friend groups, I think it's really important to know how to leverage your strengths in all your relationships. So first of all, I urge you to make your profile visible to other people. Share it with your colleagues if you're at work, your committee members here, family members even, because when your colleagues know how you're likely to show up, you can avoid that trial and error method of getting to know your work style. And if you show your report to your family members and friends, you see what kind of reaction you get. Because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we take our strengths for granted and we're pleasantly surprised when other people react to our list of strengths. Or you might even expect they might laugh a little bit. They think about how you're overplaying one of your strengths. Secondly, I urge you to embrace strength diversity. And by that, I mean 2 things. One is embrace the diversity of your own strengths, like how you're using them, use that full range of your strengths. And then secondly, be thoughtful about how you embrace the diversity of strengths within whatever teams that you are on. Third, understand to be patient with other people, because after all, you might be overplaying your strengths, they might be overplaying theirs, so unintentionally on their part. And if you're offering to lend support, you're volunteering for projects, volunteer for tasks. They're going to tap your realized and unrealized strengths rather than your learned behaviors, because other people might not know it's learned behavior for you unless you speak up and say, I want to play this role, or I want to use this strength. And then finally, I would say set strength goals for yourself based particularly in your unrealized strength areas, because you're going to grow there and those are strengths you might want to use more. So after today, I would encourage you to take some time to think about the impact you want to make on Oceanside Perspective. Think about these questions maybe, like what realized strength is your greatest superpower you could be lending? What realized strength might you overplay on this team? What unrealized strength are you eager to contribute? What learned behavior do you want to avoid using? What weakness could be exposed or need compensation in some way from your other strengths, as you're participating in this group? And something I mentioned to Melanie before we got on this call is that if you are interested, I could create a slide deck of each of your page 2 so that you have and could share this slide deck with one another and know what each other's strengths are. So as you're working together, you can be more thoughtful about how you want to participate on this team. So I'll leave it up to Melanie maybe to organize. If all of you want to do that, or any of you want to do that, you let me know and I'll make that for you. It'd be easy. I do that for all the corporate groups with whom I work when I do this kind of work. And I'd also suggest you take page 2 of your profile and put it somewhere where you can reference it every day for either setting a daily intention, like how do you want to use your strengths today? Or reflecting at the end of the day, like which strength did you use? What was energizing? What was not energizing? Because the more intentional you are about using your strengths, the more likely it is you're going to achieve all those individual benefits I mentioned in the beginning: less stress, more creativity, more resilience, etc. All right, finally, questions I get asked commonly are, what if I'm different in school or in work than in my personal life? Like, I had different things in mind when I took this assessment. And I will tell you, the reliability and validity measurements on the strengths profile show there's no significant difference between a strength profile assessment taken with one of your lives in mind, with your other life, your work life in mind, your personal life in mind. Secondly, what does it mean if I have few or no strengths in some quadrants, which sometimes happens? And I would say there's no generic explanation. It has to do with how you're using your strengths right now. So for example, if you have few unrealized strengths, good sign. You're in a place in your life right now where you don't have a lot of strengths you're not able to use. Third, how often should you take the strengths profile and do the results change? I recommend retaking it once every 6 months to a year, or certainly if some context in your life has shifted, you've got a new job, you've had a child, you've moved, because undoubtedly there's going to be shifts in how your strengths are used based on the context in which you're using them. And so you want to use this tool to be helpful. The more current it is, the better. And then finally, what's a typical profile look like? You might find this interesting. Across the populations of people who've taken this assessment, the average realized strength number is 19. The average unrealized strengths is 9. The average learned behaviors is 24. Most people have a lot of learned behaviors, and the average number of weaknesses is 8. Again, no right or wrong, but that's kind of the average. So finally, recap. Strengths are the key to being your best self. You want to try and stack your strengths to maximize the power and get into the flow. You can quiet your inner critic with your powerful, self-confident inner mentor. You want to use your realized strengths wisely and try to avoid overplaying them. You want to try to express gratitude and appreciation in line with the other person's strengths. You want to moderate use of your draining learned behaviors if you can, smartly. You want to minimize the wobble of your weaknesses by tapping into other people or compensating with your other strengths. And then overall, just be mindful of your strengths and very intentional about their use. As I close, I want to share this quote from Dr. Alex Lindley, the gentleman in the beginning I mentioned, who's the CEO of the Strengths Profile Company, who said, when people understand the significance of working from their strengths, the shift can be huge. And once the realization is there, it cannot be reversed and change has begun. So hopefully, now that you've all learned more about yourself through the strengths profile, you're able to strut your strengths like my peacock in this picture here.